Francis Stonor Saunders' book, published in English as The Cultural Cold War, The CIA and the World of Arts and Letters, U.S., and Who Paid the Piper, UK, is a landmark investigation of the Cold War's hidden cultural front. Saunders uncovers the carefully concealed programs through which the CIA, in the post-war decades, quietly funded and steered cultural life across literature and philosophy, music and theater, film and the visual arts, education and publishing. By elevating some movements and marginalizing others, the agency helps set the aesthetic agenda, shaping not only Western artistic development, but the outlook of entire generations. The book argues that culture is never just culture. It is a powerful instrument for forming habits of mind, behavior, and identity. Influence over art becomes influence over public consciousness, individual and collective. Small wonder, then, that public behavior and mass psychology have drifted toward more polarized, aggressive, and often destructive patterns, undermining the basic norms of social trust, civic discourse, and human coexistence. Note, we apologize for any instances where page numbers or running headers are read aloud in this edition. Footnote numbers are preserved, and links to the corresponding notes are provided in the description. The Cultural Cold War, The CIA and the World of Arts and Letters, Francis Stonor Saunders by Francis Stonor Saunders. Originally published in the United Kingdom under the title Who Paid the Piper by Granta Publications, 1999. Published in the United States by The New Press, New York, 2000. Distributed by W. Norton and Company, Inc., New York. The New Press was established in 1990 as a not-for-profit alternative to the large, commercial publishing houses currently dominating the book publishing industry. The New Press operates in the public interest rather than for private gain, and is committed to publishing, in innovative ways, works of educational, cultural, and community value that are often deemed insufficiently profitable. The New Press, 450 West 41st Street, 6th floor, New York, NY 1036, www.thenewpress.com. Printed in the United States of America, what fate or fortune led thee down into this place, ere thy last day? Who is it that thy steps hath piloted? Above there in the clear world on my way, I answered him, lost in a veil of gloom. Before my age was full, I went astray. Dante's Inferno, Canto 15. I know that's a secret, for it's whispered everywhere. William Congreve, Love for Love. Acknowledgements. Writing this book has been a prolonged act of vagrancy, as I have dragged my unsightly luggage chain of tatty boxes and files from place to place. For their kindness in taking me in, together with this caravan of archival loot, and offering me the chance to work undisturbed, I wish to thank Elizabeth Cartwright Hignett, Frank Dable, Nick Hewer, Eartha Kitt, Hermione Labron Johnson, and Claudia and Marcelo Salom. To Ann Pasternak Slater and Craig Rain, I owe special gratitude for their constant support and solid faith. Through them, I met Ben Sonnenberg in New York, and for that flourishing and, on Ben's part, erudite friendship, I am indebted. Ann Pasternak Slater also helped ease my passage by writing a letter of recommendation which, but for her own generous embellishments, followed my draft with uncanny precision. Carmen Cowell's support was acquired late into the writing of this book, but counts as a powerful source of inspiration on account of its sheer and unqualified confidence at a time when I had all but lost my own. Jay Weisberg was an invaluable help. As an historian of film, I have yet to meet his equal in scholarship and breadth of knowledge. Further gratitude is extended to those who became partners in a project which had its share of misadventures, but who stayed for the bumpy ride without losing their sense of humor. My editor, Neil Belton, my agent, Felicity Rubenstein, everyone at Granta Books, copy editor Jane Robertson, Jeremy Bugler, Tony Cash, Tony Carew, Lawrence Simanowitz, Andre Schifrin at the New Press, and Melvin Wolfe at Beldock, Levine, and Hoffman. For their capacious friendship and extraordinarily elastic patience, I am grateful beyond words to Madonna Benjamin, Zoe Heller, Conrad Rober, Domitilla Rufo, Roger Thornham, and Michael Wilde. But for my mother, Julia Stonor, and my brother, Alexander Stonor Saunders, life outside of this book would have run into a cul-de-sac. For their encouragement, loving support, and endless propping up, I offer them shamelessly hyperbolic thanks and the dedication of this book. When I started researching the cultural Cold War, I had high hopes of benefiting from America's Freedom of Information Act. It is certainly the case that many previously classified government documents have been released to researchers under this act, and recent studies of the FBI have been greatly enriched as a result. But retrieving documentation from the CIA is another matter. My initial request to them of 1992 has yet to be answered. A subsequent application was acknowledged, though I was warned that the total cost for supplying the records I had requested would be in the region of $30,000. However, as the CIA's Information and Privacy Coordinator went on to explain that the chances of my application being successfully processed were virtually nil, I had little to worry about. The Freedom of Information Act is much vaunted by British historians, who indeed face far greater challenges in researching material relating to the defense of this realm. But its application, at least as far as the CIA is concerned, is lamentable. Compensating for this is the wealth of documentation existing in private collections. Historically, successive American administrations have spread into the private sector. In the Cold War period especially, American foreign policy was shared between government departments and a kind of consortium of freelance, quasi-governmental figures and institutions. It is this balkanization, even of clandestine or covert operations, which has ensured, paradoxically, that such operations can be scrutinized. The story is there, for those willing to trawl for it, in the sea of private papers stretching across the archives of America. Any work relying heavily on this archival material is naturally indebted to those many archivists and librarians who so expertly lead the researcher in, through, and out again of the complexities of their collections. These people provide the joists on which the house of history rests. Though I hasten to add that responsibility for any structural or architectural blemishes rests entirely with the author. For their help and advice, my thanks go to the staff of the Tammy Mint Library in New York, the Joseph Regenstein Library in Chicago, the Dwight D. Eisenhower Library in Abilene, the National Archives in Washington, the Butler Library at Columbia University, the George Meany Center in Washington, the Harry Ransom Humanities Research Center and the Lyndon Baines Johnson Library, both in Austin, Texas, the John F. Kennedy Library in Boston, and the Harry S. Truman Library in Independence. I also wish to thank the archivists at the Public Records Office in London and at Reading University Library and the staff of the London Library. Many people agreed to be interviewed for this book and suffered my repeated visits, telephone calls, faxes, and letters with elegant patience. All interviewees are named in the notes and sources at the end. I thank them all, but in particular Diana Josselson, who was extremely generous with her time and bestowed on this book the benefit of her sterling memory, her firm, though not uncritical, support, and photographs from her personal collection. Introduction. The way to carry out good propaganda is never to appear to be carrying it out at all. Richard Crossman. During the height of the Cold War, the U.S. government committed vast resources to a secret program of cultural propaganda in Western Europe. A central feature of this program was to advance the claim that it did not exist. It was managed in great secrecy by America's espionage arm, the Central Intelligence Agency. The centerpiece of this covert campaign was the Congress for Cultural Freedom, run by CIA agent Michael Josselson from 1950 till 1967. Its achievements, not least its duration, were considerable. At its peak, the Congress for Cultural Freedom had offices in 35 countries, employed dozens of personnel, published over 20 prestige magazines, held art exhibitions, owned a news and features service, organized high-profile international conferences, and rewarded musicians and artists with prizes and public performances. Its mission was to nudge the intelligentsia of Western Europe away from its lingering fascination with Marxism and communism towards a view more accommodating of the American way. Drawing on an extensive, highly influential network of intelligence personnel, political strategists, the corporate establishment, and the old-school ties of the Ivy League universities, the incipient CIA started, from 1947, to build a consortium whose double task it was to inoculate the world against the contagion of communism and to ease the passage of American foreign policy interests abroad. The result was a remarkably tight network of people who worked alongside the agency to promote an idea that the world needed a Pax Americana, a new age of enlightenment, and it would be called the American Century. The consortium which the CIA built up, consisting of what Henry Kissinger described as an aristocracy dedicated to the service of this nation on behalf of principles beyond partisanship, was the hidden weapon in America's Cold War struggle, a weapon which, in the cultural field, had extensive fallout. Whether they liked it or not, whether they knew it or not, there were few writers, poets, artists, historians, scientists, or critics in post-war Europe whose names were not in some way linked to this covert enterprise. Unchallenged, undetected for over 20 years, America's spying establishment operated a sophisticated, substantially endowed cultural front in the West, for the West, in the name of freedom of expression. Defining the Cold War as a battle for men's minds, it stockpiled a vast arsenal of cultural weapons: journals, books, conferences, seminars, art exhibitions, concerts, awards. Membership of this consortium included an assorted group of former radicals and leftist intellectuals whose faith in Marxism and communism had been shattered by evidence of Stalinist totalitarianism. Emerging from the pink decade of the 1930s, mourned by Arthur Koestler as an abortive revolution of the spirit, a misfired renaissance, a false dawn of history, their disillusionment was attended by a readiness to join in a new consensus, to affirm a new order which would substitute for the spent forces of the past. The tradition of the radical dissenter, where intellectuals took it upon themselves to probe myths, interrogate institutional prerogative, and disturb the complacency of power, was suspended in favor of supporting the American proposition. Endorsed and subsidized by powerful institutions, this non-communist group became as much a cartel in the intellectual life of the West as communism had been a few years earlier, and it included many of the same people. There came a time when apparently life lost the ability to arrange itself, says Charlie Citrine, the narrator of Saul Bellows' Humboldt's Gift. It had to be arranged. Intellectuals took this as their job. From, say, Machiavelli's Time to our own, this arranging has been the one great, gorgeous, tantalizing, misleading, disastrous project. A man like Humboldt, inspired, shrewd, nutty, was brimming over with the discovery that the human enterprise, so grand and infinitely varied, had now to be managed by exceptional persons. He was an exceptional person, therefore he was an eligible candidate for power. Well, why not? Like so many Humboldts, those intellectuals who had been betrayed by the false idol of communism now found themselves gazing at the possibility of building a new Weimar, an American Weimar. If the government and its covert action arm, the CIA, was prepared to assist in this project, well, why not? That former left-wingers should have come to be roped together in the same enterprise with the CIA is less implausible than it seems. There was a genuine community of interest and conviction between the agency and those intellectuals who were hired, even if they didn't know it, to fight the cultural Cold War. The CIA's influence was not always, or often, reactionary and sinister, wrote America's preeminent liberal historian Arthur Schlesinger. In my experience, its leadership was politically enlightened and sophisticated. This view of the CIA as a haven of liberalism acted as a powerful inducement to collaborate with it, or if not this, at least to acquiesce to the myth that it was well-motivated. And yet this perception sits uncomfortably with the CIA's reputation as a ruthlessly interventionist and frighteningly unaccountable instrument of American Cold War power. This was the organization that masterminded the overthrow of Premier Mossadegh in Iran in 1953, the ousting of the Arbenz government in Guatemala in 1954, the disastrous Bay of Pigs operation in 1961, the notorious Phoenix program in Vietnam. It spied on tens of thousands of Americans, harassed democratically elected leaders abroad, plotted assassinations, denied these activities to Congress, and in the process, elevated the art of lying to new heights. By what strange alchemy, then, did the CIA manage to present itself to high-minded intellectuals like Arthur Schlesinger as the golden vessel of cherished liberalism? The extent to which America's spying establishment extended its reach into the cultural affairs of its Western allies, acting as unacknowledged facilitator to a broad range of creative activity, positioning intellectuals and their work like chess pieces to be played in the great game, remains one of the Cold War's most provocative legacies. The defense mounted by custodians of the period, which rests on the claim that the CIA's substantial financial investment came with no strings attached, has yet to be seriously challenged. Amongst intellectual circles in America and Western Europe, there persists a readiness to accept as true that the CIA was merely interested in extending the possibilities for free and democratic cultural expression. "We simply helped people to say what they would have said anyway," goes this blank check line of defense. If the beneficiaries of CIA funds were ignorant of the fact, the argument goes, and if their behavior was consequently unmodified, then their independence as critical thinkers could not have been affected. But official documents relating to the cultural Cold War systematically undermine this myth of altruism. The individuals and institutions subsidized by the CIA were expected to perform as part of a broad campaign of persuasion, of a propaganda war in which propaganda was defined as any organized effort or movement to disseminate information or a particular doctrine by means of news, special arguments, or appeals designed to influence the thoughts and actions of any given group. A vital constituent of this effort was psychological warfare, which was defined as the planned use by a nation of propaganda and activities other than combat, which communicate ideas and information intended to influence the opinions, attitudes, emotions, and behavior of foreign groups in ways that will support the achievement of national aims. Further, the most effective kind of propaganda was defined as the kind where the subject moves in the direction you desire for reasons which he believes to be his own. It is useless to dispute these definitions. They are littered across government documents, the données of American post-war cultural diplomacy. Clearly, by camouflaging its investment, the CIA acted on the supposition that its blandishments would be refused if offered openly. What kind of freedom can be advanced by such deception? Freedom of any kind certainly wasn't on the agenda in the Soviet Union, where those writers and intellectuals who were not sent to the gulags were lassoed into serving the interests of the state. It was, of course, right to oppose such unfreedom. But with what means? Was there any real justification for assuming that the principles of Western democracy couldn't be revived in post-war Europe according to some internal mechanism? Or for not assuming that democracy could be more complex than was implied by the lauding of American liberalism? To what degree was it admissible for another state to covertly intervene in the fundamental processes of organic intellectual growth, of free debate, and the uninhibited flow of ideas? Did this not risk producing, instead of freedom, a kind of freedom, where people think they are acting freely, when in fact they are bound to forces over which they have no control? The CIA's engagement in cultural warfare raises other troubling questions. Did financial aid distort the process by which intellectuals and their ideas were advanced? Were people selected for their positions rather than on the basis of intellectual merit? What did Arthur Koestler mean when he lampooned the international academic call girl circuit of intellectual conferences and symposia? Were reputations secured or enhanced by membership of the CIA's cultural consortium? How many of those writers and thinkers who acquired an international audience for their ideas were really second-raters, ephemeral publicists, whose works were doomed to the basements of secondhand bookstores? In 1966, a series of articles appeared in the New York Times exposing a wide range of covert action undertaken by America's intelligence community. As stories of attempted coups and mostly botched political assassinations poured onto the front pages, the CIA came to be characterized as a rogue elephant, crashing through the scrubland of international politics, unimpeded by any sense of accountability. Amidst these more dramatic cloak-and-dagger exposés came details of how the American government had looked to the cultural Brahmins of the West to lend intellectual weight to its actions. The suggestion that many intellectuals had been animated by the dictates of American policymakers rather than by independent standards of their own generated widespread disgust. The moral authority enjoyed by the intelligentsia during the height of the Cold War was now seriously undermined and frequently mocked. The consensocracy was falling apart, the center could not hold. And as it disintegrated, so the story itself became fragmented, partial, modified. Sometimes egregiously, by forces on the right and left who wished to twist its peculiar truths to their own ends. Ironically, the circumstances which made possible the revelations contributed to their real significance becoming obscured. As America's obsessive anti-communist campaign in Vietnam brought her to the brink of social collapse, and with subsequent scandals on the scale of the Pentagon Papers and Watergate, it was hard to sustain interest or outrage in the business of Kulturkampf, which in comparison seemed to be fluff on the side. History, wrote Archibald MacLeish, is like a badly constructed concert hall, with dead spots where the music can't be heard. This book attempts to record those dead spots. It seeks a different acoustic, a tune other than that played by the official virtuosi of the period. It is a secret history insofar as it believes in the relevance of the power of personal relationships, of soft linkages and collusions, and the significance of salon diplomacy and boudoir politicking. It challenges what Gore Vidal has described as those official fictions that have been agreed upon by all together, too many, too interested parties, each with his own 1,000 days in which to set up his own misleading pyramids and obelisks that purport to tell sun time. Any history which sets out to interrogate these agreed-upon facts must, in Svetin Todorov's words, become an act of profanity. It is not about contributing to the cult of heroes and saints. It's about coming as close as possible to the truth. It participates in what Max Weber called the disenchantment of the world. It exists at the other end of the spectrum from idolatry. It's about redeeming the truth for truth's sake, not retrieving images that are deemed useful for the present.